didn't see the Paul McGrath interview, did you, on Sky?
No, I actually just saw the reaction. I saw Les Ferdinand's reaction to it. It was really nice.
It was really, maybe we should mention it. Because I guess because we all have that certain ownership of Paul, and we think, we all appreciate how phenomenal he is. It was actually just kind of nice to see, there we go, younger audience exposed to this guy was really amazing. He shouldn't be forgotten. He's that good. And Les Ferdinand talking about how he had no weakness, and you did find yourself sitting there.
Bit of pride.
Brimful of,
Yeah.
It was nice.
Produced that show we did with him in Virgin. So had the day with him in there. So bring a bit of that into it.
Touch on that, yeah. So we'll do our breaking news, a few bits besides, and then Jonathan. Cool. Paul, I think we're pretty much there.
Yeah, some we are, but just to make sure we're recording a video as well, please.
Everything recorded. Everything recorded. Okay. Cool. Oh, we just had a moment. Jonathan Wilson in the can recorded, coming your way. And we went upstairs happy with ourselves and thought, well, we'll just do a quick chat now and throw Jonathan, we're done. And somebody said, the verdict is in, the 115 charges verdict is in. Manchester City have won. Oh no. I mean, interesting, exciting, but oh no. There is a verdict in, and it is in Manchester City's favour. It's not the 115 charges. That has not been settled yet. That won't be settled for some time. It is not the 115 charges. And we thought, okay, all is maybe not lost here.
It hasn't rendered everything we've done today completely pointless.
Yes, I think so. However, it's not uninteresting and it's not unimportant. This is a case that Manchester City took against the Premier League, and we first heard about it this summer, where in effect they're saying that, your rules which stop us striking really nice sponsorship deals with some associated parties, they're not fair. And they challenge them. And it turns out, in the eyes of the law, they are unlawful. And so it's a big day for Manchester City. City, for instance, were, it now turns out unfairly, blocked from agreeing 2 huge sponsorship deals just earlier this year. And this ruling, it would seem, I mean, I'm no legal expert, nor is Conan. You're not, are you?
No.
So we're hypothesising a touch, but it would seem this opens the door now for Man City to strike much higher sponsorship agreements with those associated parties, that's the phrasing that's used here, than was previously allowed, including Etihad, their stadium, their shirt sponsor, you name it. And I suppose the start of this really in a big way, where these rulings had real teeth, was after the Saudis took over Newcastle, and there was a fear of all hell breaking loose in terms of these kind of agreements. Your shirt sponsors, last year it was 4 million. We think it's worth 200 million. That was kind of the thing. So associated party transaction rules were introduced in December of 21, which right in the wake of Saudi taking over Newcastle, and they were further upgraded this February in a bid to maintain competitiveness in the Premier League by preventing clubs from inflating commercial deals with companies linked to their owners. Transactions basically had to be independently assessed to ensure they were of fair market value. That is now unlawful. For various reasons I won't get into here. Some of them complicated, some of them less so. But it does open the door for Manchester City. I would think Newcastle's eyes are widening. And there's no early sense that the Premier League are going to challenge this. I don't know if there's an appeal process open to them, but it's not nothing either.
You don't have an official toilet paper sponsor, do you? Because here's 50 million we've put aside for just that reason. Hell has broken loose now, and it's funny, isn't it, the dichotomy you can feel. I think sometimes everyone looks at the financial fair play rules and realises, God, that's really just cementing the top tier, and you wish that there'd be a bit more room for growth, especially with the middle tier. But then you have something like this, and then it's a never ending. Like if you have a bottomless pit of money, which these clubs do have, these state-owned clubs, then you can't see where it ends, which is the really scary thing.
Yeah, I wonder. That's kind of the worst case scenario, I suppose, as you've laid it out. I mean, I don't know. Will there be any restrictions? I mean, can you now suddenly give $1 billion for like a shirt sponsor? Where does it end? I don't know. You almost feel there must be some limit of some kind, but certainly not via the associated party transaction rules.
No.
Illegal. is the thing. So that's a really good day for Manchester City, for the likes of Newcastle, and I suspect we may come back to it on the show at some stage this week. That news broke just after, literally, we had spoken to Jonathan Wilson, so he's on the way, albeit not quite getting into the nitty-gritty of that. We head into the international break. Liverpool on 18 points, Manchester City 17 points, Arsenal also 17 points, and then Chelsea and Aston Villa 14 apiece. So Chelsea, I talked to Jonathan about this. It's starting to kind of come together. Maresca is saying he's liking the feel around the place. They drew 1-1 with Forest. Liverpool 1-0 winners against Crystal Palace away from home. Saturday lunchtime kickoff. Should have been more, especially first half. They were good. Arsenal 3-1 against Southampton. It was 0-0 at half time, and then they did go a goal down. But by the same token, it was a dominant performance. 17 shots to 3. Saka 1 goal, 2 assists. And Manchester City 3, Fulham 2. Also went a goal down, but equalised pretty quickly, and then by 47 minutes were 2-1 up, and ultimately that scoreline slightly misrepresents maybe the tension. Fulham, though, should have been 2-0 up for sure, and I guess the Rodri absence looms in your mind. They had their fair share of chances in that game. And then, of course, there's Spurs, where Spursiness came into play. 2-0 up, 37 minutes, a 6th win in a row beckoning, and they conspired to lose 3-2. Ange Postecoglou, probably the worst defeat of his tenure. So that was the weekend. And we'll come on to Aston Villa and Manchester United in just a moment. Postecoglou, furious after the game. He did, though, just a dose of philosophy maybe early on in our proceedings here. He was asked afterwards, he was obviously not so upset that afterwards he was able to talk about how well Jurgen Klopp looked last week. Klopp was in Germany receiving an award of some sort, and there was a general glow off him, that mansion in Mallorca and playing paddle every day and not being stressed every day, I suppose, had done him the world of good. So he looked really well, and this was put to Postecoglou, who at that stage looked especially grey. And, I can't help but notice you and notice him, and what are your thoughts on all that?
You looked $1 million, didn't you?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. It's like 5 months out of the job, it's 10 years.
Funny that. Yeah. Has he done a press conference since? No.
I'm paid to remind you, but you're, as well as Fabian being the youngest, you're now the oldest.
Yeah, thank you, mate.
But in all seriousness, do you ever, when you look at how good Jurgen's looking now, do you ever worry about what toll it might be taking on you? And as you get older, what do you have to do differently to maintain the physical and psychological oomph that you need to do the job?
Yeah, look, it is a challenge, and like I said, I think the role is becoming more difficult than when I first started, absolutely, just in terms of the demands, and not just in the Premier League, but just in general, the demands of, and the pressures and the sort of short-term nature of roles in general in football for managers. And look, my philosophy on all that is that I think just generally in life, stress is the biggest thing that will hamper those things you're talking about, your health, whether you're mental, physical health. And I've learned to get to a space where I try not to let that into my life, whatever circumstance, particularly in the professional world. And that becomes really discipline, like I said, in just making sure that what's important to you stays important to you. Don't get sort of drawn away from that by being dragged into areas that other people potentially want to take you in. That like I said, I've become really good at making sure, because I think if I'm, like I said, I'm, the oldest now, and if I ever get to the stage where I don't wake up in the morning and really look forward to the day, I know then, that's the time for me. There's no point in me hanging in there, because that's when I think you're doing it for the wrong reasons, and that's where that stress gets in. But it's just, again, I think a lot of it's just about understanding yourself as a person. And I know what's important to me in my life, and I know what's important to me in my professional life, and that's my anchor. And if I stay to that, hopefully I kind of keep everything else away.
That was Ange. Good question.
Ange, speaking of looking tired and drained.
Good question, good answer, I would say there.
I think so. I think the interesting thing about that is I wouldn't have thought Jurgen Klopp looked bad when he was Liverpool manager. There's certain managers that you see and you're thinking, God, he could do with a good night's sleep. He could do with a rest. I always remember Paul Lambert showing up on Football Focus or something like that a few weeks after leaving the Villa job, which was completely toxic for him. But you know, he looked 5-10 years younger immediately, like very quickly after leaving. And someone like Jurgen Klopp, who looked absolutely great, I thought, as a manager. He kept himself in great shape. You know, to actually see the difference then when he steps out of management. And I think it is an interesting one. I don't know if you've had any designs and stepping into coaching or management in your life. It's definitely something that I flirt with. And I always think, oh, okay, if you're really going to do this properly, you really need to commit, I'd say, your whole life to it almost. And it's like you'd rather have two separate lives to live out that dream, because it just seems like you can't do it and you can't be happy and healthy at the same time.
I think once Klopp had announced his departure was imminent because he was just burnt out. Maybe you're projecting perhaps, but I did feel like I saw it more and thought he looked a little bit washed out. Not terrible by any means, but maybe a little bit washed out, a little bit drawn, haggard. And it's only when you saw the photo last week. Did you see it?
Yeah.
So he's far more tanned. And again, a tan can do a world of good for anybody. But the hair is a little bit sun-bleached as well. And I think there's an ease to his body language. So you kind of did the, God, yeah, you do. You look well. I mean, it's not complete transformation. But even Ange said, geez, $1,000,000.
Yeah, he looks lighter. Like, that's what he looks. Yeah, he looks like he's got less cares. Like, he's waking up every day thinking, which coffee shop am I going to?
Yeah.
Not like I need to get into the office immediately because we have another 3 injuries and whatever else. It's it really speaks volumes.
Stress is one of those things I suspect as well. You often don't realise how stressed you are because you acclimatise to it. And it's only when you step out of something you realise, oh my God. You know, it creeps up in you, I think, a little bit. Stress, you know?
I think it's a good lesson for anybody who's, you know, going through. You wouldn't know until you're going through it, but often if you step away from a situation like that, it's you're afraid to step away because, like you say, you're acclimatized. You're always sort of kidding yourself that if I can just get through this 3-week period, and then the 9th time you say that, you might start thinking, you know what, that's 9 by 3. That's 27 weeks now that I'm talking about here. And you know, once you step away, you immediately think, why did I stick that out so long?
I did send a few people a reel I'd come across, which was adulthood. Adulthood is basically promising each other that next week won't be as busy. And I was like, maybe that. Well, that was Ange and Spurs. He doesn't feel like the oldest manager in the Premier League. I think that points to just a younger feeling league, like the Roy Hodgson types and the Ferguson types and the Wenger types. You know, it was an older league a decade ago. Maybe that points to the demands. But Ange is now the elder statesman of the league in terms of age. Aston Villa 0, Manchester United 0. Never has a game promised so much in terms of the fare on offer, the consequences for when Villa inevitably won 4-2 or 3 and delivered so little. I got an ominous feel as soon as the show on Sky started and I saw Les Ferdinand, Steve Sidwell and Berbatov. And then I saw Gary Neville was in an NBC studio. Yeah. He's off trying to crack America at the moment. I don't like the smell of this. This is not the big time Sunday I'm kind of looking for. And so it proved. Like, about the most exciting thing in the game was Rob Jones trying to re-establish connection with Stockley Park on 91 minutes, and Carragher, you know, hallelujah, the end of it. It just never happened. It never caught fire. Manchester United obviously are in such shocking form that they had a very defensive tilt, and Rashford and Garnacho were tucking in very narrow and didn't want Villa to get through them easily, and that's understandable given the situation. But nor did they have the firepower to create anything against Aston Villa because they're just not good enough. And then you'd have a better sense than I, but like for Villa, like there's a degree of, God, it's tough to get yourself up for mid-table opposition after playing Bayern Munich. It felt even an atmosphere after the Lord Mayor's show, didn't it? That is as kind of low-key Manchester United are in town at Villa Park atmosphere, I'd say, as you can remember.
Oh, definitely. It was... everybody in the crowd seemed hungover as well as the players on the pitch. It was just like the morning after, oh my God, my head's sore here. Are we going again? I don't know. Never has there been a more Aston Villa week than drawing with Ipswich, beating Bayern Munich and drawing with Manchester United, who are now, as you say, basically a mid-table team. But one bit of praise that Ten Hag does deserve is that for the last year, I've been looking at the way Villa play on the ball, and it looks so simple. They pass through the middle of the pitch. It's so vertical, so direct, so easy, and it's a real credit to Unai Emery. And I remember going into last season, because he had from October the season before that, and I went into last season thinking, are really going to get away with that again this year? And they did. They got away with it for another 50 games basically. Boys turning on the ball and passing forward, and it is the one thing that Ten Hag and United definitely went after and they shut down. And where Villa have been strong at then is somebody like Bailey keeping them honest out wide, and maybe look at Dean wasn't really on it. Maatson probably should have came in a bit earlier, but they definitely didn't give United anything to think about out wide, so it really simplified the job. But it was like Erik ten Hag was right to go after it. Yeah. But a lower quality game, I can't remember. Just so many overhit passes, overhit touches, and then with about 25 minutes to go, you felt that both teams were happy with us.
Yeah.
And you're like, just put us out of our misery.
Yeah.
But Rob Jones keeps it going for another 7 minutes.
Yeah. Jim Ratcliffe, I mean, you can look at the line of Manchester United hierarchy, and obviously none of them look especially happy at the moment, and you can presume that things aren't going well in his life. I mean, Jim Ratcliffe's doing just fine. Ineos Britannia are now the first British entry into the America's Cup final in 60 years. They're going to take on New Zealand next week. Ben Ainsley is captain of Ineos Britannia. So he was there at their, I don't know, was it a semi-final win or did they win an event to get into the final? I'm not au fait with this world, especially, I must confess. But he got off a boat on a very sunny, glamorous location and was like high as life. But invariably he was asked about the Ten Hag situation. So here is what Jim Ratcliffe had to say about Ten Hag. This was, we should say, before the Villa game. But, it's interesting nonetheless.
I like Eric. I think he's a very good coach. But at the end of the day, it's not my call. It's that management team that's running Manchester United that have to decide how we best run the team in many different respects. But that team that's running Manchester United has only been together since June, July. Yeah. They weren't there in January or February or March or April. They've only arrived. Omar, Dan Ashworth, they only arrived in July.
Sure.
They've only been there. You can count it in weeks almost. They've been there a long time. So they need to take stock and make some sensible decisions. I mean, our objective is very clear. We want to take Manchester United back to where it should be. And it's not there yet, obviously. It's very clear. So there's work to be done.
So you can see how there were headlines of doesn't give the vote of confidence in Ten Hag, work to be done. They all jumped off the page. But when you listen to him, it's a far more kicking for touch, reasonable kind of an interview. And he's smart enough to understand, well, this giving votes of confidence is not a good idea for me, medium term, short term, long term. Because if I give Eric the vote of confidence now, well, one, that can change in the space of a week and I look rather foolish and trigger happy and like I'm a little bit all over the shop. But two, for Ten Hag or for any other manager going forward, it can always be said, well, you set the precedent of giving Ten Hag the vote of confidence that time when Ineos Britannia had done their business, and now you're not giving this current manager vote of confidence. And I guess, why would someone, I'm sure as smart as him, want to sign up for that kind of a cycle? So he probably just did the right thing there. I wouldn't read into that, no vote of confidence.
The only thing I'm reading into it, and I'd be a bit concerned as a United fan, is that you started off with the Glazers, and people wanted to blame them. They've managed to insulate themselves and put Ineos in front of them and say they're looking after the football operation. So now Ineos is there. Jim Ratcliffe, can we get a few words? He's saying, well, it's not my decision. I've put somebody else in front of me. I've insulated myself now. And now Ashworth is the man to talk to. And it feels like there's a bit of, not buck passing, because this is clear, defined roles, which obviously United want to get to. But when I watched them all show up at Villa Park in that line that you talk about,
it's a lot.
Yeah, why are they rocking up at Birmingham? It's smacked of, almost, were they hoping that, this is the final death nail and we can make this call finally? I don't know, but it was weird that they all rocked up in an away ground like that.
And when things are going badly, every optic is bad. There's no avoiding it. But there was something intense about them all there in a line.
Yeah.
Tricky away fixture, pressure on the manager. It's just adding to that sense of something's a brewing, whether they're intending it or not. They may well go to every game, even when they're at the good times, but when it's bad, it feels ominous. On Ineos Britannia, by the way. So, again, first British entry in the America's Cup in 60 years. This is obviously a reasonable deal over in the UK. It's just a funny one, isn't it? We don't want to dwell on the point overly, but what struck me as well was when he walked ashore after the the victory. And again, he started the interview with the press, and he just said,
It's the oldest international trophy in the world, and it's the only one pretty much we've never won. Remember that expression, Britannia rules the waves? Well, we don't in the America's Cup so far.
and it's one of those things, Rule Britannia. You see it like on the BBC proms or something, or you see Nigel Farage on YouTube singing it like so vociferously. It's never a song I really cared to look too much into it beyond the like Rule Britannia, rule the waves kind of thing. And I was just like, so he's called his whole team Ineos Britannia, and I just checked, and I'm sure everybody knows this, but I wasn't generally au fait with what the next line is after Rule Britannia, rule the waves. Britons never will be slaves. This is a poem written in 1740. The implication being somebody's going to be a slave. It won't be us.
Yeah.
And I don't, never thought I had to say the sentence. I don't for a second think that Jim Ratcliffe is in favour of slavery. But it's that interesting thing, isn't it, when you watch English life from slightly afar and you're slightly outside the bubble. There's still that element of like horrific things happened, like unspeakable things, and they're, I think in the UK there's an increasing awareness, like the school syllabus perhaps didn't maybe do its damnedest over the subsequent centuries to alert UK children to what had happened. But I think in more recent times there's an awareness that actually, you know what, it wasn't all great, and yet there still is that aspect of Rule Britannia. That's what we'll call our team. Jesus, like the Empire were great days though. They were great days. Yeah. We were number one.
Yeah. 2 World Wars, 1 World Cup. Yeah. That's what it's happening, isn't it? Almost.
Like, can we make Britain great again?
Yeah. And I know every country has that little thing that you can tap into from back when, and we probably all are lined some way from our ancestors. If you look at the Irish songs that stir up something in the pit of our stomachs, it's rebel songs but they're more songs of defiance. They're more songs of standing against something like that.
Talking about things like freedom.
Yes, exactly. Not talking about things like imperialism and taking over and quashing and things like that. So yeah, obviously, like you say, Jim isn't consciously thinking about those days, but there's definitely something in the pit of his stomach that's calling back to it.
It feels warm, yeah. Well, look, once again, Britannia are ruling the waves, and they'll go against New Zealand next week if you're interested. One last thing, by the way, before we speak to Jonathan, I said I got an ominous feeling that the Villa-Manchester United game might be a lower key affair when I saw even the panel lineup. Yeah. But one thing which really worked pre-game, I'm sure lots of Irish people saw it and felt good about it, was Paul McGrath's interview with Patrick Davison. And it's so funny. I mean, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, but it had struck me this week that Aston Villa play Manchester United and that Ireland are playing also this week. And so I had actually reached out to Paul McGrath just week or two ago to say, Paul, listen, we'd love it. I mean, it'd be a perfect week to have a big conversation, And to be fair to him, it's no secret he's not overly comfortable in front of microphones, and he'd just done the big Sky interview and anything. And I think quite understandably, he said, you know what, that's plenty for me. And I said, Grant, might talk to you again. But nonetheless, like I was watching and almost like weirdly delighted for him. Like his brilliance is being appreciated in front of a younger audience, a reminder to English footballing people at large. Because in Ireland, it's not required, obviously, but it's just a reminder to everybody just how amazing this guy was and the hurdles he had to overcome. Les Ferdinand, following the interview, talked about how when he played most centre-halves, he would analyse where their weakness was and attack accordingly. And yet with McGrath, he couldn't run him behind. He was too strong to get in a fight with. He was too good in the air. Like there was just nothing, And I remember Pat Nevin telling me numerous times on the radio, McGrath was just about the one player he couldn't dribble past. Just, it was not an option for Nevin. McGrath was just that good. And it was lovely. And the interview was very good. And McGrath talked about almost a guilt he feels that he let down his teammates, drinking too much at that time, partying too much at that time. Some familiar themes to us, obviously. But what was really nice in it, and because Patrick Davidson sort of said, I just have to interrupt, Paul, I think your teammates aren't viewing you the way you seem to be talking there, because they were talking about the 92-93 title run-in when United pipped Aston Villa. McGrath played every single game that season. He was the PFA Player of the Year. Only 6 defenders in 50 years have won that award. And Davidson sort of said, "Geez, I've read your book, and there's other contributors in your book. They love you. Like you there's no apology needed." It's like, I hope you don't feel that way. And McGrath, he had a great sentence, and he said, "Oh, I've forgiven myself." Quite a powerful moment in the interview. I've forgiven myself. It spoke of someone who's had to work on themselves and work their way through things. And gosh, it was lovely. I was just sitting there going, delighted. It was great. It was the best part of the whole broadcaster and Villa Park.
100%. And we don't need to go over it, but Paul McGrath was unbelievable. There's a reason why his moniker is God at Aston Villa, because of how good he was and still is. Like, everyone still so clearly remembers everything he could do and everything he couldn't do against him. And that was always almost the heartbreaking thing, that it always felt like he didn't forgive himself, even though he had nothing to be beating himself up over. And even though everyone had read his book, and I produced a show that we had him in Virgin, we did a 2-parter with him, just a sit-down interview with Tommy Martin, who did a brilliant job. But for weeks and months trying to get Paul lined up, it's just so uncomfortable talking about those sides of themselves, even though, again, they're well documented. And I think it always was, even back then, just maybe a bit of the guilt. But when he talked through it, you felt nothing but empathy for him. And the stories that came out of it were all almost sweet. People looked at how Jack Charlton treated him. Paul McGrath told stories about Jack Charlton tucking him into bed and putting the blanket up to his neck. Just these really beautiful, poignant stories, and nothing but, like I say, empathy, sympathy, and just love. Like, Paul McGrath is just so universally loved by everyone. So it was always sad to think that maybe he didn't feel that, including his teammates and things like that, because all I feel for him, and anybody in Ireland, Villa, Man United, is appreciative as well that he was able to give those shifts every weekend. And as Les Ferdinand said, he was able to do it by training once a week, and maybe he should have done the same, and he might have been better.
Yeah. I did, when talking to Jonathan Wilson on Friday to line up the interview, tell him that many of his pieces end up in the Sunday Independent. I'm not entirely sure he was aware of that, but Jonathan Wilson, welcome home, Jonathan.
Oh, thank you very much. It's great to be to be back, I guess.
Pleasant surprise.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the financial situation is there, but my agent will be looking into that.
At least 20%, I would think. So, well, lots to talk about. I guess we might start at Villa Park, because in advance it just felt so set up for something consequential to happen in many different ways, and then nothing much did happen. Ten Hag won't be terribly upset about that. Enough of a sticking plaster, I would think, to just keep the Wolves at the door?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I'm not saying that he would absolutely guaranteed have gone had they lost to Porto and lost that game, but I think the 2 draws probably just drag it out a little bit longer. But the fact that is the obvious headline from this weekend, and I think you're right. It is the headline. It's what a newsletter for the Guardian. That's what I led on. I think it is the headline, and yet it's what, team in 5th against team in 14th, a goalless draw, which, I mean, Marcus Rashford could have been sent off, but not a huge amount happened. And I think that itself is indicative of just how so all-consuming the Manchester United soap opera has become.
What are you making of Manchester United performances over the last? God, a week's a long time in football. Over the last over the last couple of games, does it strike you as? I mean, certainly after Spurs, I suppose it did. But does it strike you that even the Porto game into Villa game, as team not playing for manager and the whole thing devolving horribly before us, or signs of life?
I don't think there's many signs of life. It's just sort of drifting on, and you sort of think if there's any club apart from United, they would have got rid of the manager by now. And I think 2 things have happened. So one is that because it's Manchester United, because they've got the Ferguson precedent, nobody wants to get rid of a manager hastily, because they've seen that the greatest manager they ever had took 4 years to win anything. And so, nobody wants to be Pete Molyneux, that's the fan who had the banner at the Crystal Palace game in December 1989, saying, 3 years of excuses, it's still crap, hurrah Fergie. Nobody wants to be that fan now, and nobody wants to be that board member now. And also, I think the takeover in February has been a longer, more complex process than they probably hoped it would be. I sort of feel they were a bit indecisive in the summer, that you could have justified them saying, look, we're going to give Ten Hag a full season, but they need to come out and say that, yeah, very vocally, very obviously. Whereas they were clearly talking to other managers, they couldn't quite find somebody who fitted. So he managed to undermine Ten Hag without actually appointing anybody, which seems like the worst of both worlds.
Yes, it does. They have any number of problems. The 5 goals in 7 matches is being much talked about, which is as low a tally as they've managed in 7 matches since 1972. And then at the other end of the pitch, there was that very odd moment where Johnny Evans and Harry Maguire end up in the starting lineup, in for De Ligt and Martinez. Ten Hag in his pre-match interview cited rotation. And even, I mean, somebody like Jamie Carragher, even in the first 30 seconds of commentary yesterday, said, you don't rotate centre-halves, and certainly not 7 games into a season. So he said they've been dropped. And you know, there was like a kind of a, God, are they odd choices given the speed of Villa? That was kind of the fear pre-game. Like the logic here seems a little off. And then, of course, Johnny Evans goes and has man of the match performance just to almost muddy the waters further. So is Johnny Evans now the guy who's going to play for the next 3, 4, 5 matches on the back of that? Like, is that some kind of a long-term, medium-term answer? Clearly not. So again, it's all just unsatisfactory.
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. I remember last season when Maguire and Evans played together and sort of making the joke, you know, what is this? Where's Morgan's testimonial? Well, he's had a lot of testimonials because it seems to happen every couple of weeks that the two end up playing together. And the thing is, yeah, Johnny Evans was a very good player, remains a very good player, but he's 36. And, you know, he came back to the club. Basically, the club were doing him a favour to let him train. And then, you know, he was sort of, well, I'll hang around for you, give you a bit of cover. And it was sort of mutually convenient, but nobody thought he'd be playing more than, you know, half a dozen games, maybe coming on in extremis. And yet suddenly, you know, he looks like their best centre-back, which is ridiculous. And Maguire is not as bad as people make out. You know, he's a perfectly good player. I can sort of see Maguire against Watkins actually isn't the worst matchup in the world, as it proved. But the idea that Maguire and Evans is the partnership you want to go in with, and of course that then it casts a spotlight on the other two, on Martinez and De Ligt, both of whom played for Ten Hag at Ajax. They're clearly Ten Hag signings. And this is one of the problems with with keeping Ten Hag on for another year, that they gave him another 180 million quid of transfer budget. So, okay, Martinez was already there. And, you know, he's a World Cup winning centre-back. He's clearly a good player. De Ligt, I'm less sure about, but they went out and bought him because Ten Hag wanted him. If they do replace Ten Hag, I don't know, in the November international break, before the January transfer window at the end of the season, is any new manager going to want De Ligt? Are they going to want Mazraoui? Are they going to want Ugarte, who I guess doesn't have the previous Ten Hag link? But Xerxes, another Dutch player, those all seem very Ten Hag signings that he's clearly had quite a big say over. Why are you giving a bloke you clearly don't fully trust 180 million quid to spend? Why are you putting yourself in that position? So none of it really makes sense. None of it adds up.
Which is quite surprising, given the intelligentsia that we're seeing strewn across several seats at Villa Park yesterday.
I mean, it's disappointing. Is it surprising? I mean, I'm not sure they ran Nice, or they have run Nice particularly well. I think Nice have improved recently, but certainly their start at Nice wasn't great. Ineos in cycling terms, I think not great. Sailing, I mean, they've got Britain into the America's Cup final is that even what they call it? You know, the summer sailing thing that they've done for the first time since 1964, which apparently is a good thing.
This achievement has moved you.
Yeah, well, I noticed it. I noticed a headline about it.
I take those points, though. I mean, I hadn't really looked too much into their performance at Nice, for instance. So maybe surprise is precisely the wrong word.
Well, I mean, I think it has improved. So the positive way to look at that is to say they made their footballing mistakes at Nice, and now they're a bit older and wiser.
Well, maybe the surprising aspect is, as you laid out the sequence of events there, like that doesn't seem like any further in than page 2 or 3 of How to Run a Football Club, basic common sense situation that they've transgressed. You know, it's like these are fairly big mistakes that they've made as the surprise.
Yeah, and I mean, I think when they took over, there was a feeling of, great, the Glazers have gone from the football side of the business anyway, and I think the concern people had was, what is that interface between the Glazers and the Ineos representatives going to be? That doesn't seem to be a problem yet, actually. Although there's been a lot of churn of directors. Ineos have got their own people there, but so far that there's no great tension seems to have developed, which is it's early days, but I guess a positive sign. But I think United fans hope for some, certainly in the summer, they hope for some sort of fairly radical change, whether that meant getting rid of Ten Hag, which I guess is made more complicated by winning the FA Cup final, or a different type of player coming in. But actually, if you say what has changed since Jim Ratcliffe took over the club, well, a lot of club employees don't get a packed lunch. That seems to be the biggest thing. A lot of people have been laid off. A lot of people who were working from home have had to come into the office, and it turns out there's not enough office space. They've had to turn hospitality suites into offices. It just seems like the Glazers, but a bit less pleasant. And is that what the revolution was meant to be? It all seems very underwhelming. Now, I understand that there are reasons for that drift. There's reasons why they haven't been able to act as decisively as they might have wanted to. But I also think that when you're taking over, you need big statements. You need people to know you're in control, and that really hasn't happened yet.
You mentioned some of the new signings. Xerxes and De Ligt were getting a feel for where they are now and their Manchester United careers. So verdict's out big time. Xerxes for sure. De Ligt, you're kind of hoping that the player we saw several years ago is still there?
Well, the problem is with that Ajax team, and this is sort of the big question that hangs over everything. We saw Ten Hag be very successful with that Ajax, and you can say, "Oh, look, it's only the Eredivisie, and 3 titles in 4 seasons there for Ajax. It's barely more than par," and there is some truth to that. But equally, they were within 30 seconds of getting to the Champions League final. The games where they beat Juventus, or the ties where they beat Juventus and Real Madrid, were genuinely thrilling. They played really good football in those games. So how could Ten Hag do it then and not here? But then you look at the players, and which of those players? I mean, it was a young side, Dusan Tadic accepted, but which of those players has kicked on and become the player we thought they would? Frankie de Jong, maybe, but he's not really the sort of all-conquering midfielder we thought he might be. Donny van der Beek just seems to have essentially stopped being a footballer. I know he's at Girona now and was playing in the Champions League last week, but he didn't look anything like the player we'd seen at Ajax at either Everton or at United. But yeah, Anthony, I mean, okay, wasn't always necessarily a start in that team, but he looks massively overvalued at 80 million. But you go through that, Onana was in that team, and I guess a decent keeper, capable of making great saves, but you don't entirely trust him. Yeah, none of that side have really gone on to be the player that you hope they might be. And De Ligt maybe is the most disappointing of all of them, that he's had chance after chance at big clubs, at Juventus, at Bayern, now at United. And I don't know if you saw the Jamie Carragher bit on Monday Night Football after the Tottenham game, but his analysis of where De Ligt should have been when Mickey van der Ven made that run for the first goal and where he actually was. He certainly seemed to think that was really, really basic defending that De Ligt wasn't doing. Now, I know that confidence can affect players, and that sometimes very good players have spells where they make very bad decisions repeatedly because their confidence is gone. But this has been going on for a long time for De Ligt, and with the best will in the world, I don't think Manchester United at the moment is a place to get your confidence back.
No, and maybe that brings us to the Marcus Rashford question again, which is sort of the point. With somebody like Grealish, missing it in the Euro squad is kind of like a jolt and a rock bottom moment and a kind of spur. Rashford has had so many of them. And yesterday, if he had been sent off, which he quite probably should have been, would have been yet another kind of rock bottom moment, because the nature of what should have been the 2 yellow cards. And yeah, that jolt is not coming. I know he was better in Porto, but then he follows it up with those kind of moments yesterday. And I think the increasing sense with Rashford, Jonathan, is I look forward to 10 or 15 years and almost reading the autobiography to find out what's been going on, because something's going on.
Yeah, I mean, his form collapsed last season for whatever reason. I think actually this season he had a poor start. There's no disputing that. The Community Shield, he missed a couple of chances. I suppose at least he's getting the position Fulham game, he was poor. But he'd actually picked up. He got the goal against Southampton, which was like nice goal, the sort of goal you expect him to score. He gets 2 against Barnsley, which it's only Barnsley, but he looks confident, and then gets dropped for the Palace game. What's going on there? And again, Ten Hag said, as he'd said about Martinez and De Ligt, it's rotation. We're resting him. He thought, well, he didn't play in the Euros. We're half a dozen games into the season. If you're worried about him, and I know that they monitor players very closely in training, maybe there were some red flags there. Why have you picked him against Barnsley? Surely you want him to play against Palace rather than Barnsley. So you've just got him in form, you've just got him confident, and you leave him out for the next game. And then he comes off the bench after about an hour, and rather than playing on the left where he's clearly at his best, you play him through the middle for 15 minutes, and he's sort of hopeless. And that Palace game, United were pretty good. But certainly first half, arguably first hour, should have been 2 or 3-0 up. And then the substitutions killed them. Like Glasner's substitutions made Palace better, and Ten Hag's substitutions made United much, much worse. It's Xerxes going off. They had nobody hold the ball up. Rashford was asked to do that. That's not his game. He needs the ball played in front of him. They weren't playing like that to him. And Palace gained a foothold, and then they had 2 very good chances later on and easily could have won the game. And I think even the Tottenham game, Tottenham were 2-0 up, United were down to 10 men, so they weren't likely to come back into it, but they'd stabilised, they were creating a couple of chances, and Tottenham are fragile, as we saw yesterday. If United had got one back, maybe they could have gone on and got an equaliser. And then Ten Hag makes his changes, and they get worse. And almost, I think he made a double change, and 4 minutes later, Tottenham have scored their third. So his substitutions are making the team worse. And Rashford, his handling of Rashford seems almost to have been designed to hammer Rashford's confidence even more. That he did play pretty well in Porto. I thought he played all right against Villa, but those 2 challenges, and I agree, I think both of them were bookable offences. He probably should have got a red. They were the challenge of somebody who's very frustrated and maybe a bit demoralised and sort of asking what his place in that team is. And I think that's something else. You look at what happened with, say, Jadon Sancho. I think Ten Hag's interpersonal skills probably are not what they might be.
Interesting. Okay, well, it will continue the circus. What Ratcliffe has said of the likes of Ashworth and Omar Barada and Jason Wilcox, I presume, to an extent, when he was asked after leading Ineos Britannia to that great America's Cup win, which so moved Jonathan, he said they've only been there, you can count it in almost weeks. They've not been there a long time, so they need to take stock and make some sensible decisions. That was about the most official word that we've had in Manchester United. You said in your piece, the Spursiness of Spurs is never to be underestimated, and so it proved. Postecoglou said if they're 2-0 up on 37 minutes, losing 3-2, ultimately to Brighton, the worst defeat of his tenure. Is there something irredeemably just off about this place, or how do you chalk this situation up? What happened to them, and what does it tell us about this Postecoglou Spurs?
I mean, they shouldn't be. Spurs shouldn't exist. It's an absurd concept.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. There's clubs should not have a DNA.
No.
There's no reason why the mistakes that Tottenham players made in the 90s should be in any way relevant to what's going on today.
I would feel even.
I was at
mere mention in your column, it goes against that very analytical leaning that you have, and yet here you are, Jonathan, Spursiness in all its glory all over your piece.
Well, I mean, maybe this is just being old, but I've just slightly turned against analysis. I think there is an emotional and psychological dimension that numbers don't quite access. And all I'll say is, as we walk down into the press room to get a coffee at half time, I was talking to Dave Heitner from The Guardian, and said something like, surely Spurs have got this. And then it was sort of, oh yeah, but it is Spurs. And we both referred to the FA Cup game in, I think, 2004 when they were 3-0 up at half-time against Manchester City. They had Joey Barton sent off. Yeah. We'd both been there, and City came back to win it 4-3 with 10 men. And you're like, yeah, you can't trust this lot. And I then looked up the stat, and it turns out that was the 10th time Spurs have lost. Have had a 2-goal lead in the Premier League and lost the game, and nobody else has done that more than 7 times. So Spurs do. I mean, I guess you have to be in the Premier League.
Yeah.
So it has to be a sort of mid-table, upper mid-table side for that to be true. But it is clearly characteristic of Spurs, and I guess maybe there is something in the culture that is passed on from one generation of players to the next that fans feel nervous. Because as it started to happen, it didn't feel surprising. It was like, oh yeah, no, it is Spurs. This is happening again. But it's just amazing how dominant they were in that first half. And Fabian Herzl said he thought in possession Brighton had played quite well first half, and it is true they did have a couple of good chances, but it was the way that Spurs were just ripping them apart down the Spurs right. Brennan Johnson kept on getting in behind the fullback. Kulusevski was playing really well in that sort of central role, but drifting right. Timo Werner, in a very Timo Werner way, was causing problems on the left. I mean, he was never going to score, but he is running in behind, and he did end up setting up a second goal. And Brennan Johnson had that chance to make it 3-0 just before half time. It seemed inconceivable that they could lose that game, but because it was Spurs, it wasn't. And Postecoglou was as sort of as furious and bewildered as I think I've ever seen a manager.
Right.
In that particular way. I mean, it wasn't sort of Conte sort of berating the board, berating the players, and essentially sort of saying, "Please sack me now." It was Postecoglou sort of genuinely, I have no idea why that's happened. We've got to look at it. We've got to work it out. He wants it to work. He's not like Conte by the end, who clearly just wanted to get out. Postecoglou, I think, was genuinely baffled by what had happened. And in some ways he was very good in the sense that he kept on being offered excuses. Was it because Son was injured? Was it because Richarlison was injured? Was it because he had to play in Budapest on Thursday night? And to be fair to him, he batted all of those away and said, "No, we've just got to play the game and win the game. We're 2-0 up." I don't understand what happened, and the Spurs happened. It's as simple as that.
That's all you got. Yeah. So to finish up, Liverpool were 1-0 winners away to Palace. Should have been more. They were good on the Saturday lunchtime. Arsenal and City both went 1-0 down in their respective games. Arsenal 3-1 winners against Southampton, 17 shots to 3. Dominance, Saka 1 goal, 2 assists. And City 3-2 winners against Fulham. They were 3-1 up for majority of the game. Easy to point to Rodri absence, but Fulham, to be fair, did have their fair share of chances and were pretty good. But Liverpool, City, Arsenal, within a point of each other and kind of where we would expect them to be largely. Before you go, Chelsea on 14 points are fourth. They had eventful game with Forest, 38 shots on goal between the two of them, a red card, a mass brawl. Enzo Maresca said afterwards, the Chelsea coach, "I do like the spirit of the team, the way they're fighting, the way they're becoming a team." Cole Palmer, once again, was doing his thing. Of Chelsea's 22 chances, he created 6 of them, including the goal. And that is against the second best defence in the league at present. Is the Chelsea thing, however you want to characterise the Chelsea thing, is it starting to settle down and work?
Yeah, I think it is, but I sort of think it was for the second half of last season as well. That from Christmas onwards last season under Pochettino, Chelsea were pretty good. I think they had the 4th best record of any Premier League team from Christmas onwards last season. Now, that's not to say that it's been easy for Maresca. It's not to say it was guaranteed to happen. But I don't think there's been a sudden upturn. I think the upturn has been coming and Maresca has carried it on. And maybe it's more stable, maybe it's more sustainable now. But you do look at the wastage by the side. I mean, there's essentially 15 players who played 10 or more games last season who haven't been involved at all in the league this season, who haven't been sold. Some of those have been loaned out. So, yes, they have now got a fairly tight squad of 23, 24, which is probably what you're looking for. But that's only if you don't count the other 15 blokes you're ignoring. So it's still not the right way to run a club. It's just an example of if you chuck enough money at something, it tends to work eventually. Manchester United obviously is an exception to that. But most clubs spend enough money and success will come. And I think that top 3, I'm not sure I fully trust any of them at the moment. I mean, City, obviously, there's the charges, which could lead to point deductions or whatever. But even beyond that, without Rodri, I think they look shakier than they normally do. I know that's often something we say at this stage of the season, but they do look very vulnerable in transition. And Adama Traore is a player who often has caused problems in the past. Liverpool, I think, very promising signs, but the fixtures has been pretty kind. They've got Chelsea and Arsenal coming up after the international break. That will be we'll get a much clearer picture, a much truer picture after that. And Arsenal, they do some things very well, but they were really fortunate to win that game at Villa. And I don't know, they seem to have to expend a lot of emotional energy to win games that they shouldn't have to. I mean, they should just, Southampton at home should be an easy 3 or 4-0, move on. And they they won it easy enough in the end. But they somehow managed to make that a drama, and I don't think that's necessarily a good quality. It's good that they got through it, but the fact that there was a thing to be got through, I think you can only do that so often in a season, and they seem to do that quite a lot.
Listen, great to get your thoughts, Jonathan Wilson. Thanks so much, Jonathan.
Cheers, thank you.
Jonathan Wilson there. Pleasant surprise to him that he's read by the Sunday Independent fraternity as well. That is just done for our day. If you didn't catch it earlier on, there was a panel which we coerced Colin to being a part of, so that is waiting for you, where we talk a little bit about the League of Ireland title race. By the way, this was more of a Premier League show, but the League of Ireland title race, big part of the panel earlier on, amongst other things, if you're looking for that side of the football weekend. We are back tomorrow. Dan McDonnell and Dion Fanning will be in studio. There's an international week upon us. We have Gunter Steiner on Wednesday, some rugby on Thursday, and then Friday... we'll have to see. We were saying last week it might be we need to talk about the Irish situation because they play Thursday night. Maybe that Anna panel. Oh, that's ambitious. I don't know.
He's committed it now.
Let's cross that bridge. Keep the emails coming in. Always much appreciated. Indosportpodcast@independent.ie. Colin, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.